Ashlee, we would like to thank everyone for attending the very first Student Athlete Wellness Seminar. Ashlee and I came to create this event through our work with Thrive. Thrive is a program through the Counseling Center that provides campus outreach for mental health and wellness initiatives through peer educators known as Thrive Leaders. Thrive Leaders are trained on mental health issues, suicide prevention, drugs and alcohol, Title IX, sexual assault prevention, diversity, and common wellness concerns using a public health approach. We serve the campus community by building a bridge between the Counseling Center and students, primarily by developing and implementing outreach programs and events that will positively impact the campus community. As current student athletes here at Robert Morris, Ashlee and I have dedicated our time to become advocates for the mental health and wellness of student athletes on our campus. With this seminar, we hope to bring more awareness to the importance of mental health and to reduce the stigma of seeking help.
To start off the night, we will give every panel member an opportunity to introduce themselves and to talk a little bit about their professional background. We can start off with Dr. Craig Coleman.
Thank you. My name is Craig Coleman. I'm the Director of Athletics here at Robert Morris, my 13th year in that role, and the 28th year as the softball coach here at Robert Morris. Prior to becoming an athletic director, however, I spent 20 years as a child and adolescent psychiatrist at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, where I got to work with Holly back in each of our previous lives. So a bit of an unusual combination in that I'm an athletics administrator, but spent 20 years treating lots of adolescents and young adults with a variety of mental illnesses and issues of that time. So I have a little bit of a different background than most ADs.
My name's Mike Vittorino. I'm the head athletic trainer here at Robert Morris. I've been an athletic trainer at Robert Morris for, this is my 18th year. I've been a head athletic trainer since 2001, so 17 years, or 7 years, whatever that is. I'm not good at math, that's why I do science. So athletic trainers, you know, if you don't know what we do, we're with the student athletes. We try to help them prevent injuries. If by chance, unfortunately, they suffer an injury, we're able to evaluate them. Then we can rehab them and get them back to play. We work closely under the supervision of team physicians and doctors. And over the last probably 5 years, we've become working real close with Holly and everybody probably on this panel for why we're here with the mental health issues that are going on, you know, across the college campuses and in athletics. So we've been kind of working with those and learning how to deal with those too. So we see the athletes all the time, you know, I mean, so you see them all phases. You see them a lot out of the class when they're trying to get better or get healthy or you know, just prevent injury. So we develop a relationship with them and are able to kind of see what's going on and help them get the help that they need. So, your turn.
My name is Holly Harmon. I'm the director of the Counseling Center here at Robert Morris. I've been here for, it'll be 5 years in April, and then before that I worked at Western Psych for, well, I was 4 when I worked with Craig, so whatever that math is. I work in the Counseling Center, which is, hopefully all of you at least have heard of it or know it, but it's the mental health treatment center here on campus, and we are involved in all things mental health, from doing outreach and education to working with our Thrive mentors, which are back there. I want to make you guys wave. They do amazing stuff in terms of outreach and trying to educate the campus on different mental health issues. We have therapists here, 2 of which are in the front, who see clients and help with things like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, drug and alcohol issues, you name it. It kind of comes through our door. And just so a quick plug, we're off the Nicholson lawn in front. We're Patrick Henry technically, but you can't get to us through Patrick Henry, so you go to Nicholson, you turn left and go down the hill, and that's where we are.
Hi everyone, my name's Dr. Samantha Monda, and I'm a full-time professor here in the psychology program at Robert Morris. My background is in sport and exercise psychology and counseling. So I'm a certified mental performance consultant and a nationally certified counselor, so I have dual training in both sport performance work and counseling. And so, my job at Robert Morris is to help educate and train individuals who want to go into working with athletes with both performance issues, like performing under pressure, having confidence in themselves, dealing with injuries, as well as more of the clinical things like eating disorders, substance abuse, anxiety, depression, and so forth. I was a college student athlete myself, so I went to Carnegie Mellon University where I was a swimmer. And so this issue is really close to my heart because it was really my passion for why I got into this field in the first place, being in your shoes not that long ago. And also, in addition to being a professor here, I work in a private practice, a group practice. Dr. Varla is also my group practice, where I focus mainly on mental performance issues. So we'll talk a little bit today about the mental health related stuff and some of the sports psychology and the mental training related things. In my private practice, I focus primarily on the mental performance stuff.
Awesome. My name is Dr. Lee Varla, and currently are you still affiliated with RMU? Yep. Okay, cool. So I'm the only one who doesn't work at RMU, I guess. I used to be an adjunct professor here teaching social psych, so maybe some of you were in class with me. But currently I'm a peak performance consultant at Capex Consulting, which is a private practice located in Shadyside, specializing in work with athletes, primarily mental performance or performance enhancement, but also doing some outpatient therapy services. I'm also an adjunct faculty member currently at Chatham University, working in the graduate program for counseling psychology, and there I teach ethics as well as sports psychology. My background is a doctorate in sport and exercise psychology and a master's in clinical mental health counseling from West Virginia University. And I am a former dancer in college. So one of my areas of specialty is working with performing artists who are not necessarily in sport. Most recently, my work in private practice focuses on youth and adolescents, so most of my clients want to be you. They want to do athletics in college and beyond, and so that's sort of where I'm at right now.
Hi guys, my name is Nellie Stahora, and I am not a doctor. But I am the head coach for women's rowing here at Robert Morris. I have a background previously in the business world, and I do have my MBA, so not that that's really that relevant here, but I think that coaches are probably one of the first lines of, not necessarily defense, but with student athletes, we have the ability to see things that the rest of the people at this table might not, maybe with the exception of Vit. And so I think that I provide a unique perspective in that. And yeah, that's it.
My name is Liam Kavanaugh. I'm currently the Director of Hockey Operations for the women's hockey team. This is actually my first year here, so I'm quite far behind everyone who's up here. Prior to this, I was with the University of Massachusetts men's hockey team for 2 years. It was actually at the time when I was in Boston that I actually opened up about my own struggles with anxiety and depression. Excuse me. And things kind of went viral with an organization I work with back at home, which is the Student Athlete Mental Health Initiative. The internet kind of did what the internet does best, and it kind of blasted it off. And the outreach that I had from not just only family and friends, but people I had no idea who they were, it really kind of encouraged me to continue my career on the business side of sports. Luckily enough, I landed here, and I work with the women's team and kind of get to build a bridge. I know the Thrive program does a fantastic job kind of building that bridge as well, but I had the unique instance to work with some of my players and kind of build that communication gap and close that before things kind of turn where we don't want it to go.
Thank you everyone for introducing yourselves, and I want to thank you guys for coming out today. Today's conversation centers around student-athlete mental health at both RMU and the national community. There's been a lot of discussion about student-athlete mental health, and today we're going to touch on a couple common issues and topics that are of interest to the student-athletes here at our school. So the first question is, what are some of the most relevant mental health issues facing college student-athletes today? Anyone, feel free to jump in.
Up until about a year ago, the NCAA had declared concussions to be the #1 health crisis among student athletes in the United States. And a year ago, they bumped concussions down to #2, not so much because people weren't getting concussions anymore, but because mental health issues had actually begun to exceed concussions in frequency and in severity. And so the NCAA now considers mental health issues to be the #1 crisis across the country among student athletes. And probably most college administrators would tell you that that's not unique to athletes, that it's probably the #1 issue across college campuses today. And the primary issues that I see are depression and anxiety are the main two. I mean, there are plenty of other things that can be issues for young adults in general, but depression and anxiety seems to be the two big ones. And it's not clear to me exactly why this has been such a radical change really over the last 4 or 5 years, I would say. The incidence of this has just skyrocketed in a relatively short period of time. And it's not clear, I mean, we know that the incidence of these disorders and these issues are skyrocketing among adolescents in general in our country. It's not clear to me whether there are societal issues that are causing people to just feel like their environment is out of control, whether it's child rearing issues. I know I had one parent say to me about 4 years ago that they thought they had done a really good job raising their child because they had made sure their child never had to overcome an obstacle before coming to college. And what we see are a lot of folks who come to school and really have been protected from a lot of obstacles over the years. And in college, you face a lot of obstacles. You suddenly got an increase in academic work. You've got faculty who may not be as nurturing as your high school teachers were. You're living away from home for the first time, not necessarily with people you chose to live with. And it can be pretty tough if you have not learned problem solving or you have not been sort of toughened up over the years before you get to this point. Now, that's a broad generalization. That's certainly not universally true, but it's something that I see a lot among the athletes that we refer to Holly in the counseling center.
From my standpoint, kind of just to echo what Dr. Coleman said, the depression and anxiety are, probably two of the biggest. But we've seen a lot of panic attacks with people trying to perform, and maybe they're not the person they were in high school or the person in your high school sport, because now instead of being the person to go to on a team, there's 13 of you, and you might be sitting on the sideline and not, performing or even playing. Obviously eating disorders, we've had a few of those, but we've seen schizophrenia in the last 4 or 5 years. So we're up here talking and mentioning, depression and anxiety as the major ones, but it's everything. Grief counseling. We've had some people, unfortunately, walk on to some things and see some things at home with death that no one should probably ever have to deal with, let alone an 18 to 22-year-old that is now back here, away from home and trying to perform and do that. So from my standpoint, what Craig said and Dr. Coleman said was right on with the depression and anxiety, but it's everything on us, and you see it more and more each year and each semester.
Just a quick show of hands before I start. How many of you in the audience are student athletes? So most, but we've got some that aren't too. Okay. So, the reality is, from talking to your friends and talking to people on your teams, what you hear, and depression, anxiety, absolutely. We're seeing things like having students come in with suicidal thoughts and not sure what to do or how to get through them. We're seeing issues of sexual assault become more popular on campus to talk about and to think through and to tell people about. So all of these things, I think, for a student athlete especially, gets put in a pressure cooker, right? Because student athletes are human just like every other student on campus. The differences are you've got a sport, you've got demands on your time, you've got demands on your physical body, you've got to be able to do classes and get to practice and travel for games, and, right? So the mental health issues among student athletes in and of themselves aren't different than we're seeing from the population of college students as a whole. What we're seeing with student athletes is the demands are a little different, and the time you're able to get to be able to address those issues, the supports that you have, the impact that mental health has on your ability to play your sport is a big piece of the puzzle for a student athlete that other students might face in different ways. We're seeing drug and alcohol as a big issue as well. Binge drinking on college campuses is concerning. Drug addiction, opioid use is another concern that we see. And the reality is that things on college campuses seem to be increasing in terms of the severity of mental illness that we're seeing. And we're seeing it across the board. The question is what set of things is an athlete handed that they have to also deal with on top of the other issues?
And to go along with what Holly just talked about is that the stressors for student athletes are a little bit different than the average college student, and not everyone understands that, and that can make it really difficult. So when you're talking about working in kind of a high pressure situation, when your time is limited, when everyone's kind of watching you, and many athletes have kind of a perfectionist mentality, it can be really difficult to kind of succeed in everything. And so athletes have to learn how to cope with this, and I think it's just human nature that we're all trying to figure out how to cope with life. And so these are kind of normal stresses and transitions, going from being high school to college, or maybe some of you guys are headed out of sport pretty soon. Maybe you're seniors and thinking about the next step. Leaving school and leaving being an athlete is hard. If you have always kind of identified, I was Sam the swimmer for a long time. When I went from swimmer to swammer, where did that leave you? I know it's silly, but that's the truth. Like, who are you without your sport? And, I was talking to Ashlee the other day. If you can't see it under the table, but she's got a nice little injury there. And so many of you guys may have experienced injuries in the past, but even an injury can kind of trigger some of these difficulties. It can be isolating. All of a sudden, you're not traveling with the team, you're not practicing with the team, you're hanging out at the training room, and you're in an ice bath or getting stim, but you're by yourself. Or you're separated from kind of what's going on in your normal life. So, a lot of those situations that student athletes go through can be triggers for mental health issues that they've already mentioned so far. So some of the mental health issues that I see, and this kind of relates to the performance stuff, is just the fact that sport is important, but so is life. And so all of these things that we're talking about today, I just kind of want to point out, yeah, we're talking about sport, but these are the same things that transition to life.
Yeah, I'll just say ditto to everything that everybody else said, and I'll just add one thing on the clinical side and one thing on the performance side. On the clinical side, developmentally, college, whether you're a traditional or even a non-traditional student as well, identity, who am I? And for me, one of the things that I see clinically that gives me pause, and I want to clarify for clients, is what you do and who you are different concepts. I think so much, especially here in the United States, when we meet someone new, oh, what do you do? That's kind of one of the first questions we ask. We don't talk about who are you. So sometimes I see when there's a lot of overlap between who you are, pick on Sam the swimmer, right? If you identify as, oh, I'm a swimmer, well, who else are you? So to me, on the clinical side, trying to highlight the other roles that athletes have in their lives. On the performance side, one of the big concerns that I see a lot is consistency. Just athletes either not having the tools to get into what we call a flow state or sort of optimal performance state, or there are so many things going on outside of sport that are triggering or causing or compounding issues of performance consistency.
The only thing I would add is that one of the things from my perspective that I see a lot of that the typical student doesn't have to deal with is when you have some sort of mental health trauma or situation happening, the typical student can spend a little more time and focus on that issue, whereas the student athlete has the continued pressure of being a student athlete, and maybe the best thing for you is to go home for a short period of time or to be with your family during a certain situation. And, you know, while I think most coaches are going to make sure that you can focus on those priorities, you put those stressors on yourselves to make sure that you are still upholding who you are as an athlete. And I think that's a big deal.
This is a tough one to go last on. I think I can just say ditto to everyone. But speaking directly to the student athletes that are in this room, all of you have been successful before being here, which is why you were all recruited to come to Robert Morris. So I think for a lot of you, you know what it's like to be successful, and then you're coming into an environment. Just to use our team an example, we have the Little Sisters program. So we have a bunch of they're probably 5 to 10 years old. They come in our dressing room, they skate on the ice with us. And you guys are walking role models everywhere you go, and not necessarily where you've been before. You've been kind of used to that environment. So now you're in an environment where you're going to class, you have tests, you have exams on the same day, that you might have a big game that might be a semifinal game getting you to a conference tournament. So as soon as you hit the university standpoint, now you're looking at so many different aspects of life, and a lot of people start to get overwhelmed because they're not sure what to do. So that's kind of another issue that I see that a lot of people are facing.
So for the next question, what are some of the barriers for student athletes in seeking assistance for mental training or for mental health treatment?
I think one of the biggest barriers is, I was actually reading an article this week, Kevin Love, professional basketball player. If you guys haven't seen it, I'm sure we can kind of reshare it. But he came out recently this week and talked a little bit about his mental health experience. And one of the things that he talked about there was kind of this attitude in sport, the fear of being seen as weak, or the fear of potentially what will happen if I share my status or my feelings or the issues that I'm going through right now. Could it affect my playing time? Could it affect, as a professional athlete, whether, my salary, whether I get cut from a team or kept on a team? What will my teammates think? Will they think that I'm the weak link on there? What if my opponents, come across this information? So I think that there's a lot of fear of what would happen if people found out about this. And so I think that's a major barrier. One of the things with student athletes is that student athletes are very visible on campus. So going from the gear that they wear, the backpacks with your name and number on it, with the RMU logo, even in certain sports, you may recognize if maybe there's a basketball player who's very tall in your class, you may recognize them as the person who's on TV playing, and you see them on the local news. So student athletes are visible, and so that can also be a barrier for individuals for seeking out help.
I think a lot of the times what we see are very practical concerns. When you have to schedule an appointment but you've got practice for 3 hours, do you really want to be the one that goes up to your coach and says, hey, I need an hour off, I need to go to therapy? And how hard is it to then tell people how you're feeling and what you're feeling? The other piece of it is when you're in crisis, sometimes you just kind of need to fold in a little bit and take care of yourself. But if you're an athlete, you're in the playoffs, that level of performance is still expected. And sometimes some of the things you need to do to take care of yourself almost by definition have to take a back seat to sport with performances and what's going to happen. And I think there's also a pretty big stigma in general, but also with athletes. I mean, what are the athletes we see in the magazines and on the news? They're strong, they're muscular, they look tough, they win, they make millions of dollars. And until really the article this week, there was an article that preceded that, slowly athletes are beginning to talk about perhaps there's more to an athlete than the winning title, the $1 million salary. Perhaps there's more going on for them that they're struggling with. But that's a newer phenomenon. I don't think that's been around for very long, that athletes are willing to be very public about the struggles that they've gone through.
I think in addition to the stigma of what will others think, whether it's coaches or teammates, there's also sort of the self-stigma in the form of perfectionism. I shouldn't be feeling this way, or why am I feeling this way, or I should be able to handle this. And so I think that is also sort of directed towards the self an issue. As far as logistics, just concerns about confidentiality. As Dr. Monda mentioned, visibility. If I tell coach I'm going to therapy, will he or she ask then follow-up questions about that? And then also time, as Holly mentioned. My typical workday starts at noon and ends at 8 or 9 p.m. So I'm not working typical hours because athletes, A, don't want to miss school, and then B, don't want to miss practice or games. So being able to have the time to go to a center that stays open for them, I think is another potential barrier of a more logistical nature.
I think with all the points on the stigmatization with all this, a lot of it starts before that. When I had my own personal struggles, I was a goalie, so people always told me I was crazy. But I didn't know I was actually crazy a little bit. So when it kind of started for me, I had no idea that I was suffering from depression or anxiety. I just thought I was different, and by no means is my life perfect. But when I was younger, I ran my own company. I was successful, played college hockey. Things seemed to be all in the right place, and for some reason I just felt empty inside, and I could never figure out what that was. And I think for a lot of people, before the stigma even hits in, they just don't know what they're suffering from, and they can't figure out what this emptiness is inside of them.
So I know you guys touched on the stigmatization in student athletes. That's actually our next question. So if anyone has any perspective on the stigma of mental health in college athletics, please feel free to share.
Well, so take a second and think about when you hear that somebody is, what was the athlete's name that did the article?
Kevin Love.
Okay, so he talked about having a panic attack on the court at a pretty pivotal moment. Had to leave, if I'm getting this right, had to leave the game. It's a great article. The Counseling Center tweeted it out, so if you want to go through our Twitter feed, in the Players Tribune, it's a fantastic article because he talks about this issue. He talks about this idea of not saying anything, not realizing that other players can go through the same thing. So if you think about in your own world, if somebody says to you, I have panic attacks, or I am really, really depressed, what are your immediate assumptions? What are we taught to think about? Who's crazy, who's not crazy, what that means. I mean, the reality is mental health is woven throughout the fabric of every one of our families, every one of our friendships. It's all around us, but we try really, really hard to pretend that it's not, and try really, really hard to function at a very high level and keep going no matter what. And so when you start to feel that emptiness, when you start to feel that sadness, our instinct is either to push through or completely ignore it, right? And we all do that, right? If, walk it off kind of thing. But with mental health, it has a way of coming back and saying, no, you can't just walk it off. But not a lot of people feel that they're in an environment that can say that because of the labels that get attached to when you say you have a mental health problem.
So aside from the article by Kevin Love, there's a book that was published in the last year or two called What Made Maddie Run? And this follows the story of Madison Holleran and her suicide completion at UPenn as a track athlete. And I thought that one of the issues that it kind of presented as far as stigma, it talked a lot about the use of social media these days, and I by no means don't like social media. I think it has its benefits, including tweeting out important articles for us to read. But in many ways, I'm shocked at the number of young athletes that I work with who, even as they're waiting for their appointment, or even sometimes during an appointment, will be scrolling along their phones. And that book presents Instagram as like highlights of people's life. Like, this is the part they want you to see, and this is the part that they filter, and that they change the contrast, and they put, and so it's not reality. It's an edited version of reality. And so that book talks a lot about how we all have this ability and this power now to put out to the world what we want them to see about us rather than our authentic selves. So that's just another take on this, is the social media angle.
I would just add from a coaching perspective that, I'm sure from every single one of your coaches, you hear all the time about mental toughness and how important it is to be tougher and to be stronger and to push through the pain and to push through everything that, makes you so good at your sport. And that in itself presents a kind of confused message on how we can be the best versions of ourselves as athletes, but also taking care of ourselves from a mental health perspective. And I think that there's definitely some work that we can do to kind of figure out where that balance is.
I know we've talked about a couple articles that were released. On the Players Tribune, there was actually another article by Corey Hirsch, who is an NHL goalie. He actually took his stick and broke his hand before a practice and put it back in his blocker and then pretended like he broke it from a shot. just so he could kind of excuse himself for a week of practice. And he suffered from severe depression and different anxieties. And it kind of brings me to the point of, how as a player are you able to go to your, whether it's assistant coach, head coach, whatever the case may be, what brings you to the point to ask for help? And that's where a lot of people are really struggling, is that, how do I know when to ask help? I'm worried about my playing time. I'm worried about my grades. I'm worried about how people look at me around campus. So how do I know when my coach is yelling at me 90% of the time on the ice, how can I go up to him and say, man, I'm hurting, like I don't think I can do this anymore. And he's looking at you, he's soft, like we can't have them out there. So it's kind of a tough example to put, but the stigma that a lot of people have, and I don't want to pin the older generation, but I think now with a lot of people talking about it at events like this, it helps the stigma slowly get erased. But I think with a lot of those older generations and a lot of those older coaches, sometimes players are struggling to talk to them because they're worried about what the outcome is and how much of that stigma is going to affect their playing abilities, and that also affects their kind of day-to-day routines. So.
You know, a lot of times when we talk about mental health, it's something that people hide or are embarrassed about. And when I talk to athletes, one of the things I think is really important is the fact that this is just a normal part of taking care of ourselves and our performance. So, you know, from an athlete perspective and a performance perspective, if you're working to be the best athlete you can be, so you're going to strength and conditioning to get stronger, you're rehabbing injuries that you might have, you're studying your game plans and plays, you're getting as physically prepared as you possibly could be. So why aren't you preparing mentally just as much? Because when it really comes down to it, the mental side of your performance is just as important as the physical stuff. When it comes down to it, at a big game or a big race, the difference between winning and losing is usually related to something mental. So whether you're talking about your mental health and getting that to the best that it could potentially be, or just your mental performance in terms of how you, your mental skills, there's no embarrassment in building those things and making sure that you're at your healthiest and you're at your best. That's actually not a weak athlete. That's a smart athlete to me. Like that, if you look at, and if you talk to some of the best athletes at the college level, at the professional level, most of them are working on their mental game or on their mental health. And so it's just something, another part of taking care of yourself. Another analogy in the athletic training world or the medical world is, if you were sick, if you had strep throat, would you sit around and wait for the fever to subside on its own or to suffer through the symptoms? No way. You would go to the doctor and you'd get an antibiotic and you'd feel better by tomorrow. So same thing with mental health. We don't have to suffer through it. These are things that are treatable, that they're normal. Everyone goes through this stuff. I guarantee that, every time that you're walking through the hall, you're walking past someone that's gone through a mental health related issue. So it's more common than we realize, and it's okay. And so it's not a weak thing, it's a smart thing to seek out help. And so if we look at it in that perspective, I think that it helps us to recognize that this is something that we should be talking more about, and that seeking out help is actually a good thing and a normal part of the everyday kind of process to make you the best person and the best athlete that you could be.
How many of you ever heard of Michael Phelps? He's won like 18 kajillion gold medals in swimming. I don't think there's one that he hasn't won. Well, his career is largely over. I mean, he still does stuff, but he's not at the high Olympic competitive degree. And he's come out and talked about crushing depression that he couldn't let anybody know about while he was competing. Times that there was a recent article, I'm going to forget, we tweeted that too, that he was suicidal, that he felt he was pushed to the point beyond measure, and getting help made him a better athlete, made him more able to handle the stresses of an athlete. But he didn't feel that he could do that until after his career, his Olympic pursuit has been largely over because of the stigma around him. Do you guys have any?
So this topic has been talked about a little bit, but in what ways can substance abuse become a problem for student athletes, and what proactive measures can we take to address this issue on our campus?
Do you want to start?
Substance abuse is a major issue on every college campus across the entire student body, and there's nothing about student athletes that exempts them from that except for the fear of an NCAA drug test that hopefully sways people away from using illicit substances. But alcohol, abuse, alcohol dependence, I think is a major problem on college campuses among athletes and non-athletes, and increasingly opioid dependence, particularly for athletes who get treated for painful injuries and who can get easily hooked on opioid medications. And you're all hearing about the epidemic of heroin overdoses that are happening across the country. You know, there was a time when heroin was pretty much something that you saw in the inner city, and it was treated as a crime. And now that heroin is being used by every socioeconomic status in rural areas and suburban areas, we finally have recognized that it's a health crisis, which is a little bit of the double standard in our society and the way we look at societal problems. But I think athletes are particularly susceptible to getting hooked on opioids, which is why I think Vit could address how carefully our team physicians will prescribe those, and only as a last resort and in very small quantities and for very short durations. So that's a big issue for student athletes that we can, by our medical practices, we can do our best to prevent. The alcohol issues, I think, are severe. I think that virtually every sexual assault that occurs on campus has alcohol as part of the story. Virtually every arrest that occurs to an athlete or a general student off campus has alcohol as part of the story. And if alcohol is causing problems in your life like that, then by definition you are abusing alcohol, regardless of how often you're using it, or whether you're addicted to it. Honestly, the best thing, in my opinion, that can be done is for you as peers and teammates to identify if you've got a peer or a teammate who has a problem, is to strongly urge them to get help. All of these things are fixable, treatable, but it sometimes takes a lot of courage to say to somebody who you love and who you trust and who trusts you, you've got a problem and you need to get some help. But I think it's the number one thing that you can do when you see it amongst people who you care about.
Definitely going to echo what Dr. Coleman said. Athletes get injuries at, I think, a higher frequency than non-athletes do, and they hurt. And you have to rehab, and you still have to push yourself. And so the urge to go for something that dulls that pain is clear. The other piece of it is, a lot of times we see athletes that use drugs or alcohol to dull emotional pain, right? So you go, you practice hard, you push hard all day, you ignore what's going through your head, and then at night, alcohol comes into play, or pills come into play. And so to cope with whatever is going on, a lot of athletes return to drugs or alcohol. So part of what we're trying to do is educate, right? Everybody should be talking about this. Everybody should be thinking about this. The opioid epidemic is hitting every community across the board, like Dr. Coleman said. And a lot of people don't realize opioids. Heroin is an opioid, but so is oxycodone. So are the pain pills that a doctor prescribes after you get your wisdom teeth out. So it's along a spectrum. And a lot of people think, oh, heroin's something different. No, actually, there's a spectrum of those drugs that when you get hooked on one, it increases the likelihood that you're going to go and you're going to need more in increasing amounts. Your body habituates to those things. So it's something from the physicians to the therapists to the athletic trainers that we all have to work together on and think together about how we're going to address it and how we're going to help people. But really, to echo what Dr. Coleman said, which is so important, it's a treatable illness. And a lot of people don't think that it's a treatable illness. But if you can get help, there are ways that we can help you and that this addiction can be something in your past.
If I could just add, anybody here from southeastern Pennsylvania that would know where Pennsbury High School is? Pennsbury High School is a suburban high school. It'd be very similar to Moon High School in terms of the type of neighborhood it's in and so on. It's my alma mater from another century. And I recently read an article that the class of 2007, so the folks who graduated from Pennsbury High School 10 years ago, 10% of them are deceased today from heroin overdoses. And that number continues to rise. I doubt there's anything particularly unusual about Pennsbury High School. So it really is serious.
Just real quick to touch on the opioid process here. About a year ago, I was very fortunate enough to be interviewed by TAE News. They did a story on this, about the opioid crisis. And obviously, I was a very small part, but the story was about a high school kid who almost died, and his parents were able to get him help. But in 8th grade or 7th grade, he got hooked on opioids from a surgery. And at the time, they didn't think anything of it because the doc kept saying, here, take this, just take more pain medicine, you'll be good. Not realizing that, in 7th grade, what that was doing to it, to that individual. So what we do at Robert Morris, and what we try to do, is limit, how many you get. We talk to our docs and, hey, if you can just give 3 days worth, just give 3 days worth. Maybe we keep it in a locked cabinet in our office, and they come for us and get it that way. When they're done taking the medicine, we encourage them to give it back to us, and we go into a bathroom and flush it or dispose of them the right way. So we try our best to do that. Now, do we always know? The scary part is we don't always know if they're athletes or anybody's taking stuff that isn't theirs. Does the friend have some left over from their wisdom teeth last week, and it'll help me? Things like that. So we try our best from a sports medicine team to limit it what we can, and try to get the athletes off of using it as quick as we can, and encourage the use of Tylenol and ibuprofen and things like that. And then everybody's like, oh, trainers just give ice and ibuprofen, which we do sometimes. But there's reasons. A, it helps, and B, it's pretty safe. So.
All right, this next question has a few parts to it. What are some issues that athletes face that someone with a sports psychology background can help with? What are some of the issues that the Counseling Center can help with? And could you explain the difference between mental health treatment and mental health training?
I think to start out, it'd be helpful to clarify the difference between mental health treatment and mental training, because we've kind of mentioned some of this as we've talked through our conversation today. So when you're talking about athletes, you kind of have these two parts of them. You have the performance part of the athlete, and you have the person, the athlete. And so some of the issues that athletes may present with are things like performing under pressure, having consistency, being able to focus on the right thing at the right time, having confidence in yourself, managing an injury. And those tend to be some of the general performance concerns. In my practice, a lot of times we see athletes coming in because maybe they're struggling, they're not performing the way that they want to. Their coaches have noticed this. Maybe the coach refers them because of some of these issues, and it's affecting their performance both on and off the field. On the flip side, the athlete as the person, that's when we start to see some of the mental health issues that we talked about today, the anxiety, the depression, things like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, trauma, those types of things tend to be more related to mental health treatment. And so both are really important in the athlete's world. But what we know about seeking help is that it's a little bit easier to seek help for being able to perform under pressure than it is to seek help for depression. And so what I've found in my work with athletes is that sometimes talking about the mental training stuff, so helping an athlete which is a normal part, whether you're having a problem with performance or not, but just getting to the best that you can be in your mental game is a really nice way to kind of segue into the mental health related stuff. It's a lot safer to come in to talk to someone that may understand what you're going through in your sport experience, that understands the issues, that maybe can cater to the logistics that's necessary for you to come in at an off hour or on a weekend or at not as visible of a place. And so the mental training issues oftentimes are ways and are safer ways to kind of develop rapport with someone and to kind of test out and see what this relationship and counseling is all about. Sometimes I have athletes come in and say, oh my gosh, I thought I was going to be on the couch laying down with my feet up and you're going to like put the hypnotic thing in front of me. And it was just talking to like, you know, a friend or a coach, and I just didn't expect it to be like that. And frankly, that is what this is like. We're all pretty normal individuals, and the professionals that you work with, the counseling center, or anyone else that's in our profession, are pretty down to earth. And so the goal isn't to kind of do crazy things with you. It's just to kind of sort out and help you make sense of the issues that you have going on in your life. So like I mentioned, sometimes it's safer to kind of talk about the mental training stuff first, and then it helps to open the door where people can feel safe to talk about mental health.
So this is not a perfect description, but I generally think about specificity and severity. So if an athlete is coming in saying that they're not feeling very confident going into playoffs, that's a pretty specific concern that seems to be related to their performance, and maybe it's somewhat severe. Playoffs are important, but it's not preventing them from going to class. Whereas a mental health issue may be a bit more persistent, a bit more severe, affect multiple roles that the athlete has aside from performance. So whether it's a romantic relationship, social functions, family, schoolwork, your jobs on or off campus. So that's one way that I sort of look at it. I think Holly had mentioned the word spectrum earlier, and I just think that's it's like the word of the decade for me. Everything exists on a spectrum. And so I think looking at talking with your counseling center, or talking with someone like Dr. Monda, or talking to your coach about who's the most competent professional to help me. That it might be that you open up first to your AD or to your athletic trainer and they say, I think this person might be able to help you. But then that person, as a helping professional, has an obligation to tell you what they are able to do. And if they're not the right person for you, they will help get you to somebody who is. And I think that sometimes is a misconception, that just the first therapist that you talk to or the first athletic trainer you talk to is going to be the person to help you. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes I'm sort of stop one, and maybe there's 2 or 3 stops to go. But that is an important part of the process to be the best, what did you say? The best person and the best athlete you can be. That was nice.
Real quick, finding a therapist is kind of like finding the right coach. So I'm sure many of you guys have kind of bounced from team to team. Maybe you've done club sports in the past, or maybe it's just even on a coaching staff that you really connect with maybe your assistant coach or one of the people on the staff. Counseling's kind of the same way. It's like your teachers and your professors in school. It's helping to find the right fit for you. So sometimes people go to counseling, they just didn't have the right fit with someone, and they say, I'm never going back again. I always encourage students to try again, and because it's more about finding a different person. Maybe they have a different philosophy or their training background's different. So it's kind of finding the right fit for you. So if it didn't work out the first time, try with someone different, because it may be the right fit in that case.
I think at the Counseling Center, we focus on the mental health piece of it, so less so the performance piece, and much more so things like depression and anxiety. We also deal with issues like sexual assault and what to do after a sexual assault and how to support you through that process, or how to deal with suicidal thoughts. We're not a one-stop shop to go to the hospital. We want to help you and keep going and keep doing well. We work on things like bipolar disorder and severe depression and anxiety. So things that get in the way of not only your performance in sport, but your performance in life, your performance in the classroom, the way you relate to people, how you have relationships with family members or significant others. So counseling looks at a wide scope of what you need. We are also confidential. So if you come to us on campus and say, I'm dealing with X, Y, and Z issue, we don't talk to coaches, we don't talk to Dr. Coleman, there's not a pipeline from my office. You can get help on campus that's completely confidential. And I think that's a worry of a lot of athletes. And sort of, what do you guys do? Do you tell my professors? No. We don't. Unless you tell us, I want you to confirm and tell my coach that I came in. We have you sign a piece of paper and go through a process so we can even tell the coach that you walk through the door if you want that to happen. So what we can say is it's a confidential place. And if you come in and say, you know what, I'm struggling with performance issues, I'm not performing in my sport the way that I want to, we're going to say, hey, here's a great person to talk to. They have a different take on things. It's a different way to look at the issue. We can work together. We can work separately. We can kind of blend to figure out what you need.
According to the NCAA Sports Science Institute, the division between counseling services and athletics has acted as an additional obstacle of getting student athletes proper mental health counseling. How has RMU's athletic department and counseling center lessened that divide?
I'm not entirely sure what division they're referring to, but let me give you a little bit of history. I became the athletic director here in 2005. How many therapists do you think there were, mental health therapists, in our counseling center that year? Anybody want to guess? 3. No. Lower.
1.
Lower.
0.
We didn't have a counseling center in 2005. You talk about stigma. Now we're talking several presidents ago, but the attitude back then was, well, we can't have a counseling center to admit that we have students with mental health problems. What will people think? It was sort of like somebody proposing that we cure cancer by shutting all the cancer treatment centers. It's that kind of logic. So I have to say that the first thing that we did to bridge the divide was, to hire a psychiatrist as the athletic director, who then insisted that we have a counseling center. And then when Holly was hired as the director of the counseling center, if we'd have had this program with the other therapists in the counseling center sitting in the front row, how many people would be sitting in the front row? Anybody want to guess? 0. And so eventually the need became apparent, and the more counseling time and therapy time we had, the more people came out of the woodwork to look for it. People had all along needed that treatment, but it wasn't available. And now we've got a full staff. It's probably going to grow in the future, knock on whatever this is made of. Psychiatric time, et cetera. So I like to think that our department has been part of the reason that the counseling center, part of the influence on the university to get the counseling center to grow. I think that we refer student athletes to the counseling center with their consent all the time. And I am sure that there are other student athletes who go directly to the counseling center that we never learn about, we meaning our staff or coaches or whatever. But I think that we work very closely with the counseling center. I guess Holly could tell me differently if she disagrees with that. The one boundary issue that occurs is for your protection, is the confidentiality issue that Holly was just referring to. So if I think somebody needs tutoring and I tell them you need to go get tutoring, I will actually get a weekly report on how many hours they showed up for tutoring or for study hall, whether you like it or not. But if I suggest to somebody that they go to the counseling center and get mental health treatment, I'm not allowed to know whether you showed up or not. That's aggravating for me, but the benefit is to you because your confidentiality has to be protected. That's honestly the only divide I can think about, is that we often are, as administrators and especially as coaches, we're taking care of you on the road. We're supervising you, and we actually don't know what may be going on that we don't know about. That's a little scary, particularly for our coaches who weren't trained as a psychiatrist before they became a coach. But that's really the only, I don't know what else the NCAA is referring to in terms of a divide. But I think that here, at least, we work pretty closely together.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, every college campus is different, and when I speak to friends, directors of different schools, different athletic departments have very different views of mental health and their willingness to address those issues. But I think here on campus, we meet in terms of planning and outreach and intervention, Addie and Vit and Dr. Coleman, and we work all the time to try to figure out how do we get this message across, what can we do. We have coaches that refer students to us. We have students that walk team members through our doors. We have athletic trainers. You name it. We try to keep as open of a door as possible, with the exception of going the other way. So we're never going to tell your coach anything that's happened. We're never going to tell your coach that we're concerned about addiction issues without your consent. It's protected by law. So I think, speaking for this campus, I don't feel like there's a huge divide. There might be a perceptual divide. There might be something that a student athlete is afraid to come in and talk to us because they think we might tell the coach or tell someone. But in terms of working together for planning and for outreach, I think we do a lot of work to try to help in any way that we can.
As an athletic trainer, what are some signs you can be aware of in your student athletes that might indicate they're struggling? From an athletic trainer perspective, what is your experience with helping students who need help accessing mental health resources?
There's so many signs, from maybe not showing up to practice to maybe hearing friends talk about, hey, so-and-so didn't go to class today again, to maybe missing rehab appointments, to maybe noticing that the performance is down. We're athletic trainers and we're not coaches, but we can see if someone isn't performing like they have been. To hygiene, to so many things. So I think that's where the relationship that athletic trainers have with athletes is different. It's similar, very similar to the coaches. Because we see them when they're hurt, and you have to worry about, okay, this athlete now can't play for a day, or can't play for 6 weeks, or can't play for the rest of their career. Then what do you do? And then you got to start talking to them and just see them and ask them, hey, you all right? What's going on? Do you need anything? We can get you help. I probably can't help you. And if I tried to help you, the guy to my right would be very mad at me, because that's not my job. Our job, and just to piggyback what we talked about with the thing, I don't have a divide, with the counseling center. I work closely with Holly and Diane, and if I need something, I call. And if they're busy because they're helping either another athlete or another student, then I get a call back as soon as they're free, and then we figure out what we can do and how we can help the student athlete. If there is any divide, it would be that, there's not enough of them. So sometimes our student athletes, don't get in as quick because there's no priority there. Everybody's the same from a mental health standpoint, and then telling coaches sometimes that we have to wait a couple days is that. But that's a perceived divide because of the demand, not because of wanting to help. So, but going back to the thing, you see so many, like I said, and what we do and what my experience is. Like I said, I've seen panic attacks on the field that I work with, primarily football right now, that you have to walk them off. And you want to talk about an old boy network that doesn't understand mental health? Step on the football field. Because that's supposedly one of the toughest sports you have to be, right? Like, it's a gladiator sport. You have equipment on and you bang heads with someone and you try to knock the person down and if they get up, good. If they don't, better, right? It's similar to the mentality of hockey, but it's one of probably the oldest sports with toughness is supposed to be it. To touch what Liam said, when you have some of a generation dividing coaches, when they played, this wasn't even an issue. It was the same thing with concussions. Until Sidney Crosby got hurt with concussions in this city, it was okay. What's a concussion? What do you mean they have a headache? Well, if Sidney Crosby gets hurt and he's out for a year and a half, all of a sudden concussions are important when that star gets hurt. So, we've walked people into the room before. And I can tell you from the privacy standpoint, it was myself and another athletic trainer. We walked an athlete in, and we looked at the athlete, and they said, do you want them to leave? I didn't ask that question. Holly asked that question. and the answer from that athlete was, no, I'm okay, they know everything and they can help me, which felt gratifying to me. But if that athlete said, no, get out, I get out. You know, I don't need to know what's going on, and then I'm done. We're done as a staff. So you just have to recognize the signs, and if anything seems off a little bit from an athletic training standpoint, we have to go and ask the people that know, whether that's going right to my team physician and saying, hey, this is what I'm noticing. Is this, you know, an injury standpoint, or do we have to go somewhere else? Or if I don't think it's that, I can just call Holly directly and be like, hey, this is what we're noticing. And then you also sometimes go talk to a coach. Hey, I'm noticing this. What are you seeing? Because I see them for rehab, and then to not pick on Nell, but to bring Nell into the thing, I'm not at her practice at 5 in the morning. I'm not many places at 5 in the morning. I'm definitely not on a boat. I can tell you that. So it's like, hey, you know, I see this person doing this, or this person missed rehab. Is something going on? Or, you know, and then, yeah, I noticed that too. You know, let's call Holly or Diane and get them seen. So that's where we're at from a perspective standpoint.
What can coaches do to expand their knowledge in the mental health of their athletes?
I think that Vit covered a lot of this from the athletic training perspective, but I think it's completely true, even more so probably from a coach's perspective. This is where relationships are so important with your student athletes, and being able to see when things just aren't consistent. In most cases, in my experience, when there's a change in performance, there's something else going on that has something to do with mental health. And I think that also having a relationship with your other student athletes and making sure that people understand that there's that kind of open communication is really important. The number of times that a teammate has said, I'm really worried about this person, what should we do to help them? But I think the most important thing is to realize, and this is something that I always have to realize, is that I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a doctor, remember, or any other sort of mental health professional. And so my role is to notice when things are off, help maybe identify with that person that something might be off, and then get them to the right people. And I will say that the staff of the counseling center is phenomenal when it comes to that. I've walked people into the office and they've been seen right away. I've called Holly and asked for advice on how to handle a situation, you know, obviously always making sure that we're considering confidentiality, but there's a lot of tools that they can offer to coaches and to other people that are kind of that front line to be able to help get people steered in the right direction.
If I could comment really quick on that. I'm not a coach, but you know, in an ideal world, it'd be great if all our coaches would kind of adopt the attitude that we've been talking about here, that mental health is normal and it's something that we should all be kind of taking care of ourselves on, and that if someone does have an issue, that it's okay to go and seek out help. But not all coaches are comfortable with this topic, just as not all people are comfortable with this topic. And so sometimes that can be a sense of frustration with athletes, is that my coach doesn't understand this or doesn't value it, or I wouldn't feel comfortable, or what would happen if I shared this. I think that there could be, you know, a consequence to it. And so if you are in a situation like that, you know, that's also something that student athletes yourselves, that you have teammates in each other, you may have captains on your teams, you can create that climate within yourselves. And so I really encourage any student athlete that feels as though a coach doesn't quite understand or doesn't connect with kind of the mentality that mental health is okay, to create that within yourselves. You guys have power and energy to create that climate. And so sending, you know, encouraging your younger players on your team, if you're struggling with this, guess what, so-and-so went through that last year, why don't you go talk to him or her about that? Or, you know, hey, if you're having this issue, I noticed that, you know, a freshman, you're struggling with homesickness, you know, you lost your grandmother died while you were here at school, maybe you should go talk to someone at the counseling center. Why don't you, our captain is happy to walk you down to go visit with the counseling center staff. You know, why don't you touch base with her, or she'll just stop over to your dorm and walk over with you one day. So I think that we can create that climate within the student athletes if your coaches aren't really resonating with the attitude of mental health is okay.
Sometimes athletes think they may not be understood when they go to the counseling center or seek mental health treatment in general. What else can we do to help athletes understand that mental health care is important and that it is okay to get help?
So I'll call you Sam. Dr. Monda, exactly what Dr. Monda just said was right on target, is how do we all work together to create a culture that, there are going to be people that don't understand. There are going to be people that don't get it, and that's fine as long as there are people that do get it. And as long as the helpers are around, the senior leaders on the team, the captains on the team are comfortable saying, you know what, my coach may not address this, but I'm noticing this. I'm worried about you. I'm concerned about you. I think, it would be, I think a lot of people think that counseling is not going to understand what they're really going through, and a lot of people look at the idea of going into therapy and opening up to someone is really kind of frightening or uncomfortable. And so part of it is understanding that that's a common emotion. It's not just an athlete emotion, it's a human emotion to think about spilling all your stuff with somebody. And so, I know at the counseling center, a couple different things we're trying very hard to do, including forums like this. We've got some outstanding Athlete Thrive leaders that have done some great work in terms of getting the message out. We also, you may have noticed when you came in, one of the things we realized for student athletes is you guys are kind of busy. And I am continuously impressed by all the balls in the air that you're able to juggle on a regular basis. It blows my mind, honestly, with practice schedules and work and homework and papers and meetings and club meetings. And, I hear athletes come in and tick off all the things that they're doing, and I'm amazed. So one of the things that we realized was really important to us is accessibility, right? And you were talking about switching hours and what can you do. When you came in, if you saw these papers on the table, what this is it's an online psychoeducational group that you can log into with your RMU email anytime. You're on the bus, you're going to a game, you're feeling down. It has modules on depression, it has modules on anxiety, it has information about relaxation skills, anger management, mindfulness, problem solving. So you can log in whenever you need to. 2 a.m. you're up, you can't sleep because you can't relax. You can log in to this website with your RMU email address, click on, okay, I can't relax. Help me relax. Give me some ideas. And it'll take you through about 3 or 4 different ways to help you relax and calm down. So thinking about things like accessibility, getting the message out, getting the education out, being responsive. Teams have suffered losses. Teams have suffered tragedies. How do we respond to those in a way that's helpful and that we can keep the doors open in the future?
Liam, you want to go?
Sure.
Just to add on to that, I know a big thing is kind of getting to the therapist and stuff, and a lot of the times we're talking about seeking that friend first. And I'll be the first one to say it, like you, I'm not a doctor, so I can't answer some of these questions that some people are up here. But through my own personal experiences, I've had to learn that mental illness, it's not a linear process to fix yourself. There's a lot of ups and downs, and our season just ended 2 weeks ago, and we're going 100 miles an hour through the year, and it just stops dead halt at the championship game, and feels like I hit a wall, and I still need to realize that I've established so many connections and so many different ways to fix this for myself, and you need to be proactive. And I actually went in to see Diane and Holly at the counseling center, and they're great. These people, everyone up here, we love our job. We love what we get to do every day, and why on earth would we ever judge someone for something they're coming in to seek? Everyone up here went to school except for me for this kind of stuff, but this is what people are doing up here for their living. This is what they enjoy doing. They enjoy people coming in. They're not necessarily looking to hear these awful horror stories, but they want to help you become a better person. And ultimately, that's what you guys need to realize, is that it's okay to not be okay. And that's one of the biggest things people don't know. It's okay to not be okay.
Recently read a quote, and unfortunately I can't cite the source, so maybe someone else can Google it, but it says, worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but nowhere to go. And bit of a mental toughness quote, but it kind of gives you a sense of, if you're sitting here thinking, how am I possibly going to be understood? Who's been through this kind of childhood, or who's had these kinds of transitions? Well, maybe nobody, because you're unique. We all are our own kaleidoscope of constellation of colors and shapes and textures, and you turn one thing and the whole picture changes. But that's part of counseling, or that's part of mental training, that's part of a helping profession is, yes, we need to validate how you feel. It's okay if we don't fully understand. That's why, many of us who have the training, it's less about knowing exactly how you feel and exactly where you are, and more about witnessing that with you and helping to provide you with the skills to navigate that. So when I read this question, what can we do to feel more understood? Well, you got to share. I mean, we're not mind readers. I mean, I don't know who in the crowd has depression. It's not written on your face. So there are signs, but we can't know. We can't see inside your brain. So how to feel more understood is to be willing to share your story.
I think, sharing and all that is obviously the goal, and getting rid of the stigma is huge, and we can have these talks and have this panel up and tell people what to do. But I think the more professional athletes that athletes are looking up to come out and say, this is what I did, or this is what I went through, I think that stigma and the willingness to share will change.